Here on Time Team, we like to go to places where things once stood, to dig holes in the ground, piece together the evidence, and use our imaginations to work out how they would once have looked. But not today. Welcome to Orgueil in Jersey. A stunning fortress which for hundreds of years played a little known but crucial role in the defence of not just the Channel Islands, but the whole of Great Britain. Although it's been studied for centuries, this place has still got its secrets here under this bumpy lawn, but also right up there. We've got just 3 days to unlock those secrets. Let's hope we can make it. It is a ridiculously steep slope. Orgueil, Jersey's oldest castle, sits high over Groby harbour, protected on 3 sides by the sea. Built on a steep granite bluff, it dominates not only the beaches of western Jersey, but also the approach to the Channel Islands from France. Entering the castle, you pass through a formidable corridor of gates and courtyards, overlooked all the way by arrow slits, gun platforms and battlements. It was never supposed to be easy to get in. But it's the natural defence of the terrain that's really going to cause the team a few headaches.
I mean, that's a serious slope.
Yeah, that's slightly more vertical than I was expecting.
This is the first time you guys have run this machine over this kind of undulating ground.
Undulating?
Take the slack. It's only 25,000 quid's worth of kit.
Has anybody done this before?
Not on a slope this steep. I don't think anybody's been so stupid.
That area, Castle Green, has got earthworks and lumps and bumps in it, and clearly there are structures down there. Now, that area is unexplored. We know nothing about it archaeologically and almost nothing about it historically. If we look at this plan, which shows the outline of the castle as we understand it in the 13th century, we are very unclear about the north side.
This uncertainty at the north end of the castle is due to the later addition of the Grand Battery and of Somerset Tower, monstrous fortifications built in the 16th century that would have obliterated any earlier structures. We'll have to closely examine these gargantuan walls, looking for clues in their makeup in order to find evidence of the 13th century walls and towers that complete Warwick's early castle plan. When do we first hear about there being a castle here?
Well, we first hear something in 1209, hints. We don't have mention of castle, but we've got this description from the pipe rolls, and it mentions the Isle of Jersey and deliveries to knights and 12 horse sergeants and 10 foot sergeants, and also the horses of these knights. So clearly there's fighting men here, there's a garrison, so we might assume that there's a castle. We don't know definitely until 1212. Now, this is a letter from King John where he mentions the Isle of Jersey, Insula de Jersey there, cum Castro, with its castle. So that's when we definitely know there's something here. When this castle was built in the 13th century, that's just at the point where England has lost its lands to France. So this place is now on the front line of one of the major power struggles of medieval Europe.
So this is what, King John?
It is, that's right, yes. King John, who was famous for getting everything wrong and losing all his land in France.
But in order to find out more about that, our guys are going to have to do some pretty tricky work, aren't they? What was the purpose of this trench?
To see whether we could establish the date of this wall.
And have you done it?
Not yet. What we have found is that we've got the outside edge of it plummeting away there, and then across here we've got the main core of the wall. What we'd like is for this wall to go underneath and be earlier than the main Tudor bastion wall.
So at the moment you've got absolutely no dating evidence?
Not really, not for the wall, but what we do have is rather unexpected dating. It's this water pipe, or this pipe that's running through here, which we think is probably a relic of the German occupation.
Why do you think it's German?
Well, apparently everybody that digs around the castle says the one thing that you always find is relics left over from the German occupation. It seems that's the best bet for that.
So you've got some pretty robust dating for the 1940s. Now you've just got to get back to the 1300s. No sign of the 13th century down in Trench 2 either. The rock-cut ditch is deeper and wider than anyone expected, but it's producing little to help us date it. So Trench 3 goes in to see if there is a second ditch cut below the western wall. If Stuart's right, it should run tightly butted up against the lower slopes of the castle, parallel to John's Ditch. But the question remains, where's the wall that should go with it? Stuart has a hunch and is about to boldly go where no landscape investigator has gone before. With a beady eye, he's clocked something 30 feet up.
Can you see how the masonry is different to the battery above it?
Encouraged by the daredevil antics of the rest of the team,
Good luck, Stewie.
he heads off up the rock face. Bingo! Concealed under the ivy is a second tower.
This is really good.
So in addition to the northwest corner tower, we can add a second 13th century tower just along the western wall. Everything we're finding on this site is geared to war and defence, suggesting that this castle has seen some serious action. Trench 3 has now bottomed out and has thrown up some useful pottery.
What date do you reckon that is?
15th century?
Oh, right, at the bottom.
Yeah, right at the base.
Right, well, I was just expecting it to be sort of 13th century or something like that.
Well, we thought medieval, so it's later medieval, but...
Right.
Unless it's been washed down and it's cleared out, but from the evidence, it looks like it's 15th century.
But how far back in time have we pushed this site? The answer lies in Trench 1. Where's Ian?
Ian, you got a visitor.
I said, where are you? They said, I think he's still in that trench up by the castle wall. We hadn't seen you for 2 days.
Yeah, well, I've been up here digging down all on my own, son.
What you got?
Well, we've got to the bottom of this medieval wall, and I've just got underneath the wall, down into these rocks and this old ground surface. I'm back into prehistory.
How do you know it's prehistory?
Because all the soil's absolutely full of Iron Age pot and prehistoric flint work.
You tried to insult me a couple of days ago by calling me Fred Flintstone, but I'm totally unrepentant. I still love flints. Look at how sharp that edge is across there. It actually goes in an arrow shaft like that. That arrowhead is probably about 3000 BC. And the stratigraphy we can show with this one is that this low wall here is the earlier one, and it is earlier than the big Tudor wall back there.
And it's 13th century?
Ah! Now, I can't tell you the date of it because the mortar was going to be the crucial dating thing. We do not have the Shelley mortar in here, so I cannot say without doubt that this is 13th century, but it could be. It is definitely earlier than that wall.
That's tantalising, isn't it?
So you satisfied now?
Yeah, I'm going back down again. I'll leave you to chat to Barney Rubble.
Ah! Very funny, Stuart. Ha ha.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses, and more. Please join us on this exciting journey. We need more support to make more episodes.
Groby Old Hall lies in Leicestershire, 3 miles from Leicester. And to my mind, it's an archaeological theme park. There's an 18th century farmhouse, graced with the ruins of a magnificent 15th century brick manor. While in the garden, medieval masonry rubs shoulders with a huge mound or motte, the remnants of a Norman castle.
That's a classic motte. And just that big mound of dirt. And then there's a big old bank out here, look, ain't there, look?
Oh, yeah.
See?
Yeah.
There's a lot here, and it's all the more tantalising to us as no one knows what these buildings originally looked like or when they were built. So, to launch our attack on this fantastic site, we're starting with what we think was the home of Groby's first residents, the Normans. Geophies have started to survey the top of the motte to see if they can pick up any evidence of that original castle. But Phil's already ahead of the game, as he thinks he's found our first glimpse of it just down the slope.
That wall, there's a big stone there.
Well, you know what they say, Phil? 1 stone's a stone, 2 stones a Norman castle.
Or in my neck of the woods, 2 stones is just a couple of stones. But this does look promising, and the perfect place to open our first trench to see if we do have part of the Norman castle and evidence of the Norman family that owned Groby for centuries. A family so powerful that an internationally best-selling novelist has devoted years of research to them.
Fundamentally, this is owned by the Grey family pretty well from the time that the first Grey arrives as a companion of William of Normandy in 1066, and they stay here pretty well to the 20th century.
The Grey family? So is that connected with Lady Jane Grey?
Oh, exactly.
1371, this one is dated, so that's about the same date as the medieval wall that's still standing in the field. So potentially we might be able to find some of these structures in the ground.
Well, you might just be right, Helen. And we're already finding walls in Matt's Trench, but it's too early yet to give any dates or say whether this is the hall. Over in Tracy's Trench, we've now been digging for over a day, and I would like to have some idea of what's going on. Have you got any idea at all what sort of building this might be?
Well, I think it's probably a chamber block and a two-storey.
Why do you say it's two-storey?
Well, it is high status, it's substantially built, but if you look at the window over there by the door, it's only a very small window.
And what's the implication of the tiny window?
Well, if you've got a single-storey building, high status, you'd expect to have a lot more light coming into it.
Oh, I see. That implies that there must be another floor above where all the lords and ladies came.
With the windows in, yeah, the big windows, yeah.
So perhaps we can identify at least part of the home which the Greys lived in the 14th century. A two-storey chamber block with a top floor where the lords and ladies would have slept. And it's likely to be the White Chamber mentioned in the dowry document with a cellar below, possibly the wine cellar. So nearly the end of day 2, and I think our quest to piece together the story of the Greys' homes is looking quite promising.
Oh, look at that. Blimey, it's quite big bits. It's all 15th century and probably the first half.
And whether this is the hall or not, it does look as though it's the same date as Tracy's building, so we do have at least one massive building complex. And Phil's finally got to the bottom of his castle wall. Have you done?
Too right, Tony, and it's been really, really worth it. It's just been an exceptional trench. I don't really want to leave it. I mean, we've known for some while about how this wall was built. So we've got these horizontally bedded stones that make the face on this side and on that side with this massive rubble infill, and then periodically these levelling up courses just to stabilise the whole thing. But the crucial thing that I wanted to know was, what were the foundations like? What was it actually built on?
And what's the answer?
Absolutely solid bedrock.
We already know where the Greys slept. It would have been in this chamber block over here, and we know where they wined and dined the aristocrats in the Great Hall there. But the one thing that every medieval family was most concerned about was saving their souls. And they wouldn't have done that by praying in the parish church or in some dusty old grotto. They would have had their own chapel, which, like everything else, would have been pretty high status. Now, Helen, this is where we've put in the trench to identify the Great Hall, and down here is this other range or hall that Mick's been talking about with the buttresses, and we're somewhere around here, I think. So where do you think that this chapel might be?
Well, from the dower documents, we get some idea. The first one says that something is near the chapel as far as the chamber above the hall door. So it's got to be close-ish to the hall, and here's the hall, door's probably down here, so it's in this rough area. Then it goes on to say, the chapel of the manor near the close. Now, the close is this enclosed courtyard, so we know it's near there. Now, when we move on to the later one, that says a chapel called the Old Chapel with the cloister by the same towards the south. And if it's towards the south, it's got to be at the end of this passage, one would presume, so somewhere around here.
Which is round about where we are. What do you think of this, Mick?
I think it must be somewhere in this area. I mean, there's a piece of Norman masonry built into the wall here, look.
Where's that?
Next to that black bag, look.
Oh, well, this piece here with the cuts out of it.
It might relate to an earlier building somewhere in this area.
It's not in position, but round the back wall that you can't see from here, you have to go in the garden. We're stood here. On that wall there actually are some sandstone blocks that looks to be in situ as if they're part of an original wall, which might fit with the chapel being this location.
OK, it might be that side of this wall, but it might be this side of the wall. So I think we've got to look both sides with the geophys, you know, to see if we've got the layout either side of that. Somewhere in this area, but either that side or this side.
So the team begin to geophys on this side of the wall and that side of the wall to see if we're anywhere close to being right about the location of the chapel. Because middle of day 3, and what we really need now is another challenge.
That looks awfully like the plinths that were over there, doesn't it? You've got a buttress coming out, and that's what this scar is here, the buttress sticking out. So that would, I think, clearly demonstrate that if the chapel that we're looking for here, or the building we're looking for here, is on the other side of the wall in the gravel garden at the back.
I mean, the radar we did on this side was inconclusive. I mean, we got lots of disturbances we knew, but I'm still convinced if there had been wall lines, we'd have seen them.
Yeah.
And we didn't. So, yeah, all the evidence is saying chapel has to be on the far side.
And if you compare the geophys results from both sides, I think they seal it. The chapel's on that side of the wall. And if it was anywhere near as impressive as the hall's turning out to be, it must have been rather spectacular. Pretty impressive bits of masonry.
They're fantastic, aren't they? This is all part of really good quality window tracery, glazed window. And on this one, you can even see where the masons set out his marks.
I love this V bit on Mick's one.
Well, he's got the top of a mullion in between two window openings.
So like that it would be, so it is.
Yeah, got a little arch either side of a central upright.
What kind of date do you think these are?
I think these are probably early 14th century.
So how does that tie in with this trench?
That shows us, along with these massive walls, that there's a really big building phase of early 1300s around this rectangular courtyard here.
Yeah.
Is this one of the legendary buttresses?
Yes. And you can see the mason's marks on it as well on the side.
Great, isn't it, that we've got the autograph of one particular worker who was working on this fantastic site.
This is clearly a huge building campaign that produces, from what you're showing us, some sort of really posh aristocratic manor house, not necessarily fully fortified, but like a palace almost.
The Greys are doing really well.
They are,
absolutely.
yeah.
But after that, it's demolished, and they start to build, presumably, that big house over there. And we're just getting glimpses in each of the trenches of what went on before this lot was put up.
So this is the bailey of the Motte and Bailey Castle?
Yeah, where we've got timber slots and bits of pots and odd little trenches. And we're never going to get a complete plan out of it, but at least we can see a much less regular layout of the buildings in this bailey before they come in. And, I mean, this is a mega project.
When the Greys were at the apex of their power. Great result. We now not only know what Groby's buildings looked like, but we can actually chart their history right back to the Norman period. After 1066, Hugh Gromany was given the land and built himself a really substantial Motte and Bailey castle with a stone keep and living quarters in the enclosure surrounding it. And this was the Greys' home until the 14th century, when they decided to upgrade. Most of the buildings that we've excavated seem to have come into use round about the early 1300s. How is that reflected in the history?
Well, we don't have anyone that we can definitely identify as the builder, but we've got here a William Ferrers who summoned Parliament as Baron of Groby, and he dies in 1325. So this is about the sort of time that you can imagine them going, we've got the name, we've got the position, we're rising in society. What we want is a really nice, big, medieval, style house to kind of back that up, really.
What about when our houses were demolished in the late 1400s, early 1500s? What was going on then?
Well, this comes into the people that I'm really interested in, because Elizabeth Woodville has two boys by John Grey, and one of them is Thomas Grey, and as part of her rise in the royal family, he becomes a marquis. He's given a marquis and he marries an heiress with the title. Maybe he goes, well, I'll start building here again and make this the show house that I want it to be if I'm going to be now a great Tudor magnate, having been a great Plantagenet magnate. So he builds the great brick tower and I think starts work on here.
So he might have demolished all the stuff that we've been excavating then, and that's where we get our brick tower. So perhaps when the Greys' fortunes rose with William Ferrers in the 14th century, they began to build their stunning medieval home with two-storey accommodation, a magnificent great hall and buttressed ranges forming a quadrangle. A property fit for the remarkable Elizabeth Woodville, Queen of England. and later her son, the Marquis Thomas Gray, went one better, demolishing this stone palace and building an even more fashionable brick residence, our 15th century tower.
Time Team is 100% independent and funded by our incredible fans. Want us to make more episodes? Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models, masterclasses and more. And you get to have your say in the process as we develop new sites.
This unprepossessing mound on the Isle of Sheppey may not look much, but underneath here are the remains of the last great royal palace of the medieval period. Queenborough Castle was built by King Edward III for his beloved Queen Philippa, and by all accounts it was a very impressive and important building, although strangely very few images of it remain, and those that there are seem to contradict each other. Some give it round outer walls, for instance, others give it square ones. The castle was built at Queenborough on the Isle of Sheppey in Kent in 1361. It's located at the end of the creek running from the River Swale. Queenborough itself was the last royal new town of the Middle Ages and was built by Edward at the same time as his castle. Oliver, we've got all these conflicting reports of what the castle looked like. Which one do you favour?
Well, we've got a couple. We've got this interesting elevation, which is by Wenceslas Holler, 1640s.
I think we can rely on him. He's a good artist, isn't he?
I think so. It looks pretty believable to me. But I think really interestingly, we have this plan. A couple of hundred years after the castle was built. Around here we seem to have a perfectly circular moat. Just inside that, a circular curtain wall. Within that, another range of masonry structures, very much like a rotunda. Over here, I think we can just about pick out a gatehouse, and on the other side, an inner gatehouse.
But the problem is we don't actually know what the scale of that is, or indeed what the orientation of it is.
I love this little round thing in the middle. What's that?
Seems to be the castle well, as far as we can guess. If you look behind us,
yeah,
we think it's over here.
Cool.
Is this it? That's whitey yellow. Let's have a look, Phil. But I think that's probably a tile.
Might be medieval tile, of course.
I think so.
You can see the sort of clay inclusions in it and the edge of it.
Trench 2 should give us the scale of the castle by stretching from the rotunda to the curtain wall and the moat beyond.
Oh, look at that. I mean, that is a killer arch, isn't it?
Back in Trench 1, Phil's working on the rotunda wall that he found earlier.
We got stone down here that might just be in situ. I think we've actually got part of the wall.
That's just not one random stone down there.
No. Listen to me. Look, there's one stone comes along there, and then there's this whacking great piece here. There's another stone there. Bridge, I reckon we got King Edward's castle.
If our plan's accurate, the castle's full of curving bits, so Phil's could be any of these three shapes. The angle of it suggests one of the towers, but that would make this an outside wall, which would surely mean the rotunda was too small to fit all the rooms in. The 2D plan of the castle is difficult to visualise, and as a 3D architectural model, it's beginning to look pretty peculiar.
Now when it gets to there, it turns back on itself. So it looks like the actual front of the wall is built as a sort of series of lobes. Yeah. But what we're really getting excited about, look, we've got the back edge.
And it's wide, it's about 2 metres wide, isn't it?
Absolutely cracking, isn't it?
It's a zonking great wall, isn't it?
I know, I never thought we were going to get that.
You see those two concrete blocks?
So they're modern, aren't they?
They're modern, but they might actually mark the site of this sort of edge coming round.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, of course, should be the moat of the castle.
Around about here?
Yeah.
The moat seems to be full of masonry, which looks like it's part of Edward III's castle. But we won't know which bit until we've pulled it all out.
Let's hold on for a couple of seconds here. I'm just going to have a quick look down here. That's going back onto this stony rubble.
But it might not be as solid a wall if it's just marking a roadway.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Phil's extended Trench 1 by 13 metres in his bid to find the outer rotunda wall.
Phil?
Yo!
How are you getting on?
Well, I've lost my castle, Mick.
You've lost the castle? That's very careless of you. What's going on?
Oh, no, well, you see, we're supposed to have, along this side here somewhere, the front of the rotunda. Now, if you look behind you, look, there's that road iron.
Ah, right, yes.
It ought to come through here somewhere, and all we got is clay.
I mean, is this natural that you've got here, this clay?
Well, it looks it, but it's got chalk in it.
Oh, yeah.
Shouldn't have chalk in the clay.
No, so it's contaminated with something. It's
That's
dumped
right.
then.
Yeah.
Phil's going to need to find the elusive outer wall if we're going to work out how big the castle rotunda is. By tea time on day 2, Raksha has uncovered a good chunk of the curtain wall which surrounded the entire castle.
This is basically the extent of it here.
Yeah.
We still have some of the stones packed in the bottom, but the rest of it, it's just gone.
This doesn't look as big as I expected, Oliver, on that History of the King's Works plan. It looks absolutely massive.
It looks to me as if the front portion of the wall has actually gone, so the wall would have been a lot wider, but it's still a pretty decent medieval wall.
It may only be half its original size, but at least we now know where the curtain wall is. Though we still need both walls of the rotunda to work out the scale of the castle. Everyone has been saying for the last couple of days how unique this castle is, but I don't really get a sense of what that uniqueness is.
Now, most royal castles are multi-phase buildings. They're rebuilt over many generations. Their plans are added to. Queenborough, on the other hand, it seems to be a single-phase castle. It's planned in one fell swoop. So Edward III seems to be employing his masons to impose what's almost an ideal castle onto the landscape.
Is it a rather bizarre one-off, or did it actually influence British architecture?
And we've got an interesting plan in front of us here. This is Deal Castle, which is down in Kent. It's a couple of hundred years later. It's a castle built by Henry VIII. If you put the two plans next to each other, you can see there are a couple of features that they have broadly in common. It's basically this idea that they have very symmetrical designs. There's a line of symmetry. Here at Queenborough, it's down the middle. Likewise at Deal. And also the fact that they repeat circular form. So this is 200 years later, but there's a level of similarity there.
Meanwhile, Matt's found some foundations where he was expecting to find the other corridor wall. But they look very different from the wall he found yesterday. The two corridors are crucial to understanding the use of the castle. They would have forced any visitors or marauders to take a circuitous route around the outer walls of the rotunda, either exposed to fire or forced to admire the full grandeur of the castle before entering the inner sanctum.
What Phil's got there is a piece of curving wall below the ladder there, and then another curving wall coming off it underneath the bucket and the spade, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you look at that on the plan, the only thing that fits with that is the junction of one of these walls with the main wall of the castle. But
Well, that looks all right.
Yeah, but if you put that over the top of that, then none of the rest of it makes sense that we've dug up. You can't get it all to square up at all.
So presumably that either means we're misinterpreting the archaeology or the plan's wrong.
I'm not sure we're misinterpreting the archaeology because we've looked down this trench for any other sign of any other wall to go with that, and it isn't there.
And you've got another conundrum here as well, because if that interpretation is right, and that's the curve of that, and the well is in the right position, and that's the corner of the wall there and the well there, that distance is only 12 metres, so you've got to fit all that tower, all these rooms, gatehouse, courtyard and well into 12 metres.
It won't work, you see.
It's like a sandcastle skyscraper.
Yeah, it's of tiny people. The problem is this damn thing. We've been using this for 2 or 3 days now and relying on it, and there's clearly something wrong with it.
So throughout the whole 2.5 days, this has been our one piece of certainty and sanity, and now it looks like this is completely wrong.
It should be about 4 metres wide, curving through on this line.
If the only thing we can rely on is the archaeology,
I'm confident that it's curving. Whether it's castle or not is up to you.
Okay.
we have to keep digging. So Trench 5 is located over another part of the rotunda, which might help us work out whether the plan is the wrong size or the wrong shape.
Looks like a wall.
Smug now, are you?
Further round the rotunda, Bridge has been looking for the grandest part of the castle.
You can see behind me, got loads of white material here. Basically, it's made up of mortar and it's made up of stone, just rammed together. Now, we've got three options of what that could be. Either it's intact medieval archaeology.
Bit of castle.
Associated with the castle. Number two, could be demolition associated with the castle, dating to about 1650.
So what, where people have taken the good stone out and then chucked back all the rubbish and offcuts and mortar.
Yeah, and then use the stone somewhere else.
Okay.
Or number three, it could be associated with the construction of the initial pump house that was on the top of the mound here.
That's Victorian.
That would be Victorian.
So you've got 600 years to play with.
Yeah, and the only defining feature in this trench is this cut that runs all the way down here. We've got what looks like natural on this side, and then we've got the white material on that side.
Bridge is hoping that Jonathan will be able to date the mortar to either the construction or demolition of the castle.
I mean, both are contenders. Either 1650s trash or it's medieval, you know, cheapo wall-filling rubbish. The medieval builders had a kind of cornflake box approach to having two good, firm outer walls, and you stuff the middle with ill-fitting rubbish that all settles.
During the building of the castle.
Yeah.
I'll start at this end of the trench. You can see we've dug down a little. We've got this huge cut coming straight in down there. If you follow it back, it comes up again in a straight line there and across here.
Right.
I thought this was a wall, but I'm not so convinced now because on the other side of it, actually coming in here, we've got another big cut that comes in, across there and down there. And my current theory is this. This is no longer the wall, this is the path in between, straight up to the middle of the mound.
Right.
So you had a wall coming across this way and a wall coming across this way. Both the walls, though, have been robbed away.
The direction and size of this corridor means that we can now say with confidence that the castle faced the west, looking down the high street. And we're hoping that Raksha's wall will help us with the rotunda.
Well, if you look here, there's a nice line curving there, and there's another one curving that way, so it's all going around that way.
So we can say this is the castle. It's the only big circular structure.
The wall curves towards Phil's trench, but sadly doesn't help us identify whether it's the inner or outer wall. So, with just an hour to go, Phil decides to expand Trench 1 towards a geophysical anomaly which could just be the outside of the rotunda.
That compacted surface and all the stonework is what we're seeing in the resistance. That's, to me, not the outer wall.
No, I quite agree with you, John, but what I'm saying is, let's nail this. Come on in, let's get on with it.
My money's on that's the outside.
I don't care, you're probably right. I think you probably are right. See, now we're... Yeah.
Into the curb.
There is an edge, there is an edge in the, what is it there?
The question is, the edge of what? With all the confusion, Ray Sand's hard work on the model has been a waste of time. So he's begun to work on a computer-generated version of Queen Philippa's castle.
Yeah, it brings out really nicely the way the castle, well, it's like a great wedding cake, doesn't it? We know it's packed with literally scores and scores, 50 or more separate rooms. We know there's a hall, various chambers, a kitchen, guard rooms, stores, absolutely packed with rooms.
Yes, let's not forget we're talking about a major citadel palace. Details such as 407 doors and windows towards its closing stages. Some of these must have been of the highest quality. It is, after all, no accident that it perhaps does look like a beautiful chateau with those beautiful pointed turrets, because she was, after all, very much a French noblewoman and must have felt, therefore, very much at home here.
Having located what could be the remains of the missing outer wall, Phil's auguring the middle of his trench for signs of the interior of the rotunda.
Good Lord alive. I mean, that is a big hole that's been open for a long time, that's filled up with water.
The question is, why is there a big hole where there should be a big structure? Of all the trenches that we've dug over the last 3 days, this is the one that's given us the most problems.
Well, yeah.
And we still don't know what's in it, do we?
Well, I hate to be contradictory, but I think we do actually. I think what we might have is a very large robber trench going all the way around the top, robbing out the outer line of the rotunda. Because,
What makes you think that?
well, on the mapping, we've had this feature which is a wide ditch round the top of the hill, which will come through here at 12 metres wide in places. And I think that's what we can see here in the cut and over the far side in the cut. And what we've got is a huge, great robber trench digging all that out. And we actually have a bigger castle than what you've been thinking.
Yeah, but Phil's trench, Stuart, shows a circular feature, doesn't it? With
Yeah.
a wall coming up to it. Now, these are the only circular features
That's
on
the
the
only
plan.
thing that makes sense with that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And the width of this makes it 24 metres, you know, to centre it on the well. Well, Henry VIII fixed up this castle in 1536 and then built Pendennis and St Maur's and round the coast Deal and Walmer, and they're between 20 and 30 metres. This is 24. So why shouldn't this have been a model for Henry, where that, Phil's trench, is the outer wall?
I'm just going with the archaeology as I see it.
If you go with the archaeology, you have to end up with...
And the argument continues on right until the last moment, when almost 3 metres below the surface,
God, that looks like mortar. That is mortar.
Phil finds a final clue.
Well, maybe there is a structure here after all.
Stuart was right. The hole in Phil's trench was a massive robber trench from the demolition of the castle. But traces of the cellars under the rotunda were picked up by the augering. Phil's inner wall was the junction of the inner wall with the gatehouse, and 40 rooms would easily have fitted inside the massive structure of the rotunda. At last, we're able to visualise how this unique and beautiful building would have looked to King Edward and Queen Philippa as they admired their new castle in the 1360s.
Hello, my name's John Gator. Time Team is fan-funded by Patreon. This vital support helps us to make new episodes. Joining Patreon gives you access to exclusive interviews, 3D models and masterclasses, plus lots more.